Hi, everyone. Today we're going to have an exciting RLS on peer reviewer, why you should do it, and how to be great at it. I am pleasure to have Dr. Dan Mayer here with me today, along with Adrian or Addie Malik and Elspeth Pierce. So a little bit about our panelists today. So Dr. Mayer graduated from Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Carnegie Hospital and Eastern Maine Medical Center. He is a former professor of emergency medicine at Albany Medical College and course director for a 4-year longitudinal required course of evidence-based healthcare. He is a fellow of the American Academy for Emergency Medicine, Albany, New York, and a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Mayer is an experienced specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the medical practice industry and medical education. He is an associate editor for MedEd Portal and a peer reviewer for multiple medical journals. He is also the author of multiple books, including Essential Evidence-Based Medicine, Case Studies in Emergency Medicine, and Case Studies in Emergency Medicine 2010. Dr. Mayer is skilled in medical care consulting, evidence-based medicine and emergency medicine, and patient safety for reduction in medical diagnostic errors. Next, we have Dr. Adrian or Addie Malik. She is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City. She is the core faculty member of the KUEM residency program. She received her MD from Saba University and completed her residency and ultrasound fellowship at DMC Sinai Grace Hospital in Detroit, Michigan. She currently serves as the Director of Research Training for the Department of Emergency Medicine, which includes overseeing trainee research projects and the bi-monthly resident research workshop. She currently serves as PI for multiple investigator-initiated and industry-funded studies at KUMC and has been a member of their IRB since 2020. Last but not least is Dr. Elspeth Pierce. She is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center. She graduated from the University of Kansas School of Medicine and trained in internal medicine and emergency medicine at the University of Illinois in Chicago. She is currently the Associate Program Director and Director of Simulation for the Emergency Medicine Residency. She also has faculty appointment in the School of Medicine in conjunction with Damirovsky Institute for Experiential Learning and preparing and delivering longitudinal simulation curriculum for medical students. She has an interest in multimodal medical education, gamification, psychology of safety, and med ed, feedback, and coaching. Her other interests include LGBTQ plus health disparities and reducing bias in medical education. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to jump into the peer review process. So just to kind of kick it off, feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll try to address them as we go or interrupt at any point and ask the panelists questions if you have something to follow up. But otherwise, I have a list of questions and we'll let them take it from there. So first off, Dr. Mayer, can you just tell us a little bit about what the peer review process is and why journals have it to even begin with?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me here. And I have to make a little bit of an apology. I am a decision editor for Western Journal of Emergency Medicine and JSEP Open, which I unfortunately neglected to put in my bio. I'm sorry. And I just recently resigned from my position with MedEd Portal, so I better get that up to date. But all right. So I've been a peer reviewer for probably going on about 20 years. And what's the purpose? Well, when papers get published, they've got to be vetted, that they're reasonable, that the science is done well, that the topic is relevant to the audience, and that they're fairly well written. So on the one hand, we're vetting the current research process and trying to increase the amount of knowledge. And that's the whole purpose of having journals publish things and not publish stuff that's either worthless or possibly even wrong. And we want to help the authors to put their results into the appropriate context. And that's what I see myself doing as a peer reviewer. And then there's one other thing that I've learned over the years, and that is, as a peer reviewer, I have a lot of power to help people write better papers. And there are a lot of papers that have done a good job of doing research, or reasonably good job, and they don't present it very well. And I think that one of the jobs that a peer reviewer can have is to help them make it better.
I think that's huge. I think it's always easy when we are doing our own research, right? It's all in our head. We see it so clearly. and having that peer review process is vital to like making sure we can really convey what we're trying to. Dr. Malik, how about you? Anything else about the peer review process or why you think it's important for journals to kind of have it and the value of it?
At the end of the day, the content that is being created is for us, right? So we need peer review to not only make sure that the content and the topics that get included in journals are accurate, relevant, and presented in an easy to understand fashion. Part of why this is important is because as a peer reviewer, you kind of get to help shape the content that your own specialty is going to be seeing that ultimately is going to drive how our specialty progresses over the next few years. So it's kind of it's an important job, and it's kind of an interesting and exciting job because you were sort of front and center for the first glance at things that may end up changing the way that you practice a few years down the line. I think peer review is so important, and I wish it was something that we sort of incorporated earlier in our training for our residents and our fellows, because this is something that our entire specialty benefits from. Every person who has ever read a journal benefits from, and so it's something that is so important that I feel like doesn't get the front and center spot that it really should in the way that we talk about academics and our specialty just in general. And then, of course, everything that Dan said.
Of course. I think this is an interesting thing that's going to segue into our next question a little bit. So it is a key, very important process of science, right? But it's not easy. So Dr. Pierce, why, in your opinion, would you want someone to do this? What's the value for not only for the research community as a whole, but for you as an individual, as the reviewer?
Yeah, so I think like as a researcher, as someone who's going to publish papers, like I need people to give me feedback. And it's one thing to get like copy edits or have, somebody who's like well versed in your project look over a manuscript, but to have somebody really like de novo take it apart, kind of put it back together, make sure it fits the journal you're submitting it to, and give you that feedback to just like level up your writing can really is like we need that back and forth. We need that that give and take between the peer reviewers and the researchers to really step up our game and be presenting the best thing to the readership of the journals.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Dr. Mayer or Dr. Malik, on what the value is for you individually, both as the reviewer and the recipient of a reviewer?
I mean, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Go ahead.
My writing personally has improved so much through this process. I had a mentor back in the day who kind of got me to get involved in the peer review process. I didn't know much about it. I didn't think I was qualified to do it. They assured me that I was. But really, since I started doing it, the thing that I had found that I didn't realize it was going to improve so much is my own writing, and how I have learned to formulate and shape the things that I do to better present them to the various journals that I submit to. And then also, before we started this session, we were all kind of talking about how you don't realize sometimes that your paper has a good idea that just needs to be modified in the way that it is communicated. And sometimes, like Dr. Pierce was saying, you can't see that because you're too close to the project itself. But then you get a reviewer who, at first glance, it may seem like they're being punitive with all the feedback that they're giving you. But ultimately, if you did a reviewer who is that invested in giving you that much feedback, that's honestly one of the greatest services they can do for you. Because sometimes they see something in your paper that maybe you didn't, or they see a better way that you could communicate this that you did not, and they took the time and the effort to help you reformulate that in a way that's going to be more likely to be accepted by the journal and better communicated to your audience at large.
I just had one thing, which is a little bit self-serving, because I did write a book called Essential Evidence-Based Medicine. Excuse me. But that is that we were all taught evidence-based medicine in medical school, and what are we going to do with it? And I think that there's a lot of movement in terms of how you use it at the point of care and pre-appraised sources of evidence as far as using it clinically. But on the other hand, peer review becomes a great way to put those skills to use in a very practical way that would further the quality of our research and really move our field forward.
Yeah, I think that's those are all really great points. I want to touch on something, Dr. Malik, you said. When you first started, you felt like you didn't have the qualifications. So what are the qualifications to being a peer review, and like how do we get them, or when do you know you're appropriate stage to be a peer reviewer?
So honestly, at this point, I think the qualifications for being a peer reviewer are you an emergency medicine physician and do you read papers? That's it. Like if you meet both of those things, you can be a peer reviewer. And I would also encourage anybody who's a fellow. If you are a fellow, if you have graduated, you are capable of being a peer reviewer. There may be content areas that you feel more comfortable with. So like when I started out, I am ultrasound fellowship trained, so I thought to myself, well, I've done this, so theoretically I should know something about it. So when I first started peer reviewing, I did mostly ultrasound-based peer review papers. So over time, I've expanded into several other areas, and I'm much more broad in what I will peer review at this point because I've learned a lot through the process. But truly, I can't stress this enough. Like, we have so many things that will give us imposter syndrome in this specialty. Do not let this be one of them. Like if you've ever read a paper and you've thought, well, this could have been better, or, oh my God, this is great, or I feel like they could have communicated this better, and you are an emergency physician, you can and you should be a peer reviewer. So please, the qualifications are just, is this your specialty? Do you read papers? And are you willing to like answer some emails from a journal and turn something in on time in a couple weeks? And that's it. That's all it takes.
And journals ask you up front to put down the areas that you feel most comfortable reviewing. So you can limit yourself. And I agree totally with what you said, Addie, that when you first started out, I assume you were much more comfortable reviewing the ultrasound papers because you'd spent more time doing ultrasound. And now that you're being in practice longer, you feel better doing other things. I think most of us would, if we look back on our, what knowledge we had, we probably realized that just after a couple of months of residency, you know enough about emergency medicine that you could do some peer reviews. And coupled with your EBM training in medical school, that should be more than enough. But I'd also like to put in a plug here for senior reviewers mentoring junior reviewers. And we should all be mentoring our residents in doing peer reviews. Have them do a peer review and then go over it with them and give them feedback. Not just the feedback you get by reading what the other reviewers have said, which you usually get when you do a peer review, but specifically how well they did it and what they looked at that might have been inappropriate or more appropriate or additional things they could add.
I wanted to touch on what Addie said about imposter syndrome. That's like huge, when you're first getting started with peer reviews, like who am I to comment on this unknown person who could be the preeminent researcher in this field? Like who am I to say anything about this paper? But I do feel like you kind of stick to what you're familiar with, ask for help. Like that's the other thing. I did my first few as a mentor, and then even after that, like editors are, if they know that you're just starting out, they want good peer reviews in the future from you. They want to retain a good peer reviewer. So they'll give you feedback, they'll help you out, and kind of, coach you through some of those early reviews so that you can improve and be a good reviewer in their dockets. So yeah, the imposter syndrome's real, but there's still place for folks who are just starting out, in the specialty, in the niche, in the, to get started peer review.
I think I might have a cure for the imposter syndrome part. And that is, you think about, if I'm in practice in emergency medicine, does this matter to me? Is this an important thing? Is it, can I understand what happened? Does it matter to me? I'm not an imposter anymore. I'm really a genuinely interested practicing physician who wants their specialty to be improved and wants it to continue growing. And that's really what I'm doing. So yes, I agree with you totally. The imposter syndrome is huge, but just, dump it and say, I can do this. I practice emergency medicine. I see these patients all the time. Why not? Anyway,
I decided it must be okay when the journals didn't ghost me after my first couple reviews.
I think that's the key. Like they came back. Why did they come back?
Yeah. Well, it couldn't have been that bad, so.
The problem is they do keep coming back, and so
Yeah.
it can be like overwhelming, and sometimes of like how many that you're asked to do. How is it that this is kind of more for
Yeah.
you've been on the other side of it quite a bit more than some of us. How is it decided what articles you review, or who gets what articles to review, I guess, or how often they are reviewing, those kind of logistical questions?
Well, as a decision editor, the Western Journal of Emergency Medicine, they select the reviewers. I don't. JSEP Open, I select the reviewers, and I look for a couple of things. I always want to invite at least 50% of the people that I'm looking at who express interest in that topic, who have had no experience, who've had no experience, at least not recorded from JSEP Open. So they have a score of 0 for the quality of their reviews. And then I'll pick a couple, I might pick 1 or 2 that have low scores on a previous review, and just to kind of give them another chance. And then I'll try and invite a few people that have high scores, 4 or 5s, and invite them. So that's sort of my process as a decision editor. And in terms of articles, you decide what you're interested in. The title can give you an idea of what you want to do.
Dr. Malik and Dr. Pierce, for each of you, how do you on your side decide which articles and how many you're going to review in a given 6-month period or so?
Well, currently I'm what was the term I used? I am academically constipated at the moment. So I'm not maybe accepting as many as I usually do. I try to do at least 2 or 3 a month to just kind of keep up what I'm doing. There are 2 journals that I would say I do at least 1 review for a month. And then some that I used to review for more when I was starting out that now I don't do as much anymore. Just because I was, sort of trying to get my feet wet and get a sense for what's coming through different journals. So I think my determination of how many I'm going to do is very much dependent on my schedule. I am somebody who is like very guilt driven. So I feel guilty telling people no, but I've had to start doing that because you want to make sure that you have enough time to do these well, so that you're not last minute, breezing through something and not providing good, meaningful feedback. So I try to set it up so that like the week that it's due, I will have at least enough time to read through the article fully once or twice, and then like a deep dive session where I sort of go through line by line and try and make suggestions. Like I have a peer review I'm doing that's due tomorrow, and then I have another one in a week and a half. So I try not to do more than 1 a week, and I try not to do more than 2 or 3 a month right now.
That's a huge number, it seems like. Dr. Pierce, do you stick with that many 2 per month, or you're special?
But my focus is still fairly narrow, so I try to limit who I'm reviewing for, fairly specifically to try to. I think just it increases a little bit of efficiency. Like I've now read enough in this field that I am a little faster at my reviews, and so if it's always fits and spurts. It's like 1 month I'll get like 6 review requests, and then it'll be silent for like 3 months. So I try to, if I'm getting a lot of review requests, I max out at about 2 or 3. But then I'll sometimes go months without getting anything, which then makes me think I should sign up for another journal to peer review for. Because you do kind of want that, like, fairly consistent, touches.
So a couple questions from the audience is, 1, how do you get that feedback from the review team? So you guys mentioned like the reviewers were scored, and you'll pick from lowest score, high scoring. Is there a way for you to get feedback as a reviewer, or how does that process work?
Well, you can always ask the editors to give you feedback. In general, one of the things that I personally think that journals should be doing is releasing the scores to the reviewers. But on the other hand, those scores are very subjective. JSEP Open has a scale from 0 to 5, and 1 to 5, and Western Journal is 1 to 10. So it's a little hard to compare the two, but I think that the journals should be more transparent about the reviewer scores. What you do get is when the decision is made, the decision letter will be sent to the peer reviewers, so you'll see both what the decision editor says, and then what each of the peer reviewers say. And you can compare what you've said to what other people have said about the paper. And decision editors ideally try to keep their comments limited to those that were not mentioned by the reviewers, although there's still quite a bit of overlap.
And I will say one of the things that I feel really helped me improve as a peer reviewer was reading those comments from the other reviewers. It is so helpful. And then it also kind of helps build your confidence when you're unsure about something that you're going to be pointing out with this paper, and then you read that somebody else basically said the same thing, and you're like, yes, I know what I'm doing, maybe.
Another cure for the imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
How do you let the journals know like what your content area is and what you want to review for them? I know you guys both mentioned, Dr. Pearson and Dr. Malik, that sometimes you'll reach out to journals or you'll pick journals that you want to review for. How do you indicate you're interested in reviewing for a journal?
So I'm mostly do med ed. So I try to stick to medical education journals, which helps. But then for WestGem, I kind of got navigated into the med ed special edition pretty early on. And I think it was just filling out like your reviewer form of like, what do you want to review on? What are your subjects of expertise? And I got kind of immediately put into that grouping.
I think for me, because I'm part of the cult of pro-bushers, that is ultrasound, I sort of immediately got shuffled down that pathway. But some of the other things that I now review for, if you submit papers, sometimes there will be a request after you submit your manuscript. Would you consider reviewing for this journal? And a lot of times I will click yes. Both because I'm always sort of interested in seeing the content from a new journal, but also if you are somebody who writes a lot of papers, if you do peer reviews, some journals will give you a discount on your next manuscript. So it's a good way to sort of not get your chair mad at you for publishing so many things and draining the account at your institution. But it's also a good way to get into peer review for other journals. And then if there's a journal that you in particular would really like to review content for, you can send your CV and sort of like a little request to the editor for why you would like the peer review sit down. And that is how I got to be a peer reviewer for a higher tier journal. So I was like, I can't wait around for them to recognize me, and I have no idea who I am. So I'm gonna get a little proactive and reach out to them. And now I review for them.
Awesome. I think that overcomes the imposter syndrome for sure. Just reaching out and just taking the initiative.
So if they just needed me to stop emailing them, I'm not sure which it is.
Either way, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the attention, right? Like you got to do what you got to do. One of the things that I think is interesting is how much time reviews can take. And I know, Dr. Malik, I think you were the one that mentioned that like you dedicate a day where you can like read it multiple times and go back and then take a deep dive. Tell me about how long you actually spend in terms of like hours, days on each article.
But honestly, it depends. For example, some of the meteor papers that I review for Annals or for WestGem, they take a while, especially if they're a little bit more complex. And so usually what I do is after I get a requested peer review, I will just quickly scan the paper so I have an idea of what it is that I am working with. And then I usually do a full read and then give it a day or two so I can kind of think about it in the back of my mind. And then I have a step block of time that I set aside to actually go through the paper line by line in depth to provide what I think is decent feedback. So for like an RCT or a meta-analysis or something that's a bit meatier, at this point, usually 2 reads and 2 to 3 hours of in-depth time. Haste reports are a different story. I can do those pretty quickly. And then some of the journals that are just like visual diagnosis, those take like 30 minutes or so. So it really depends on the content. But it used to take me much longer when I started. I would usually take like a full day to go through a paper, but it's just because I did not have confidence in what I was doing. So I would double and triple check everything to make sure that what I was providing for feedback was accurate. And over time, the amount of time it takes has gotten shorter as I've, I think, gotten better at this.
And Dr. Pierce, how about you? How long do you kind of block off per article?
Yeah, I think I'm at about like a half a day or so, like 4 hours or so. Kind of in sort of blocks. I will say I'll echo Adrian's read it, like let it percolate, let it simmer for a little while, and then like just kind of go back to it because I don't know how many times I've noticed I just kind of methodology issues that I had missed on that initial breeze through because I was just like, oh yeah, this A plus B plus it's like this, makes sense. And then you think about it more like, does that make sense? And then after thinking about it a few times, you're like, they definitely like there was a leap that was made that I just missed in some good writing and some fancy discussion, it's like extra discussion points and stuff, but now like I see the problem here. So yeah, I take a little bit longer, but again, I'm still relatively new to this. I don't do a whole ton. And I don't do any I usually don't do any of the really like case report really fast ones. Sometimes I'll get those, but I'm usually kind of like piecing through like a curriculum or an innovation or something like that.
Yeah. Dr. Mayer, I know when we were chatting offline, you mentioned that sometimes you can take a quick read and realize like this is going to be real short because it's really good or really bad. How do you kind of approach this time commitment to reviewing?
So since and I'm speaking now from having done it for over 20 years. And when I read the paper, I'll give it a scan, and my scan is the title of paper something I'm interested in, then I'll sign up for it. And then I'll actually sit down and read word for word and make my comments during my first read through. And then when I go back to write it, that's where I'm really spending all the time, because now I'm saying, okay, I read the whole paper. Now I'm going back to the beginning. I made this comment here, and it's totally relevant to that paragraph, but is it somehow opposite of what I said later on or what I read later on? So I'll use that to refine my review. 3 or 4 hours to do a complicated study or a randomized trial, prospective or retrospective study. Much of that time is spent writing my review, and I do tend to write long reviews. I think if you ask any editor that I've ever worked for, done this for, they'll agree. And my imposter syndrome is that sometimes I feel my reviews are too long. But hey,
Having been on the other side of this, I used to cringe at those really long, detailed reviews, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally fix this. They've given me exactly what you want. I just have to go in and fix it this way, and it's way better. So I kind of have learned to change my perspective being on the recipient of a review.
And as a decision editor, I know that if I make all those comments and they come back and they've either accepted them or given me really good reasons why they haven't, that I can pretty much accept that paper, with just a really quick, like half an hour to an hour run through.
What other kind of pearls, tips, or pitfalls do you have about the process? We'll start with Dr. Mayer.
Pearls. Do they have any pearls? We're going to get into stats in a little bit, so I don't want to talk about that now. But I think just basically what we've pretty much talked about, all of the ins and outs and the imposter syndrome. So I'm going to leave it up to Elspeth and Addie.
I think there are very, very few papers that are universally terrible or universally perfect. So your feedback should include both positives and negatives, no matter what the paper is. Especially for authors, like you never know what submission version this is, and there is nothing more soul crushing than having like 3 or 4 rejections where it's just like two lines about why your paper sucks and nothing like instruction to help you make it better. So at least include a couple lines about what they did well, and then a couple lines about what they can do better. And try and communicate that as non-judgmentally and clearly as possible. I say this knowing full well that I've very much reviewer number 2 some papers in the past, and I'm trying to be better about that. So just a little bit positive, a little bit negative. Nothing is fully perfect and nothing is fully terrible.
Dr. Pierce, any other?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't try not to be reviewer number 2. I think I fully embrace my role as reviewer number 2.
Get you a t-shirt that says reviewer number 2.
But I will say, I mean, as far as pearls, it's don't spend all your time on the reading of the paper and writing comments in the margins. The actual writing of the review takes quite a bit of time. So and that's where you also like, as you craft your arguments as a reviewer, you'll start to notice more things in the paper. And so, I think, what Dan was saying, he like writes some comments and he starts writing his review. Like, you'll spend a lot of time actually, writing it out for the editors, for the authors. And don't forget that it goes to the authors. That's the other thing, is making sure that you are being constructed, but also being kind in your review. And that pitfalls, I would say, I think it took me way too long to realize that I really should be spending time with the references. And so I often just would take those at face value, maybe glance at the titles of them a little bit, but, spend the time to double check and make sure that the authors are appropriately citing works and not, missing big gaps in what they're presenting as well.
I would piggyback off of that. There are some surprising things that you will run into in the reference list. And I mean, like, that's the basis for a lot of people's papers, is the references provide the backbone on this new idea that you're trying to put out in the universe. So especially if they have references for like a key concept or a key hinge in their argument or in their findings, just pop in there and double check that and make sure it's correct. Sometimes it is not, and so that should not be published. And you don't want your, I do a lot of this from a place of fear of being a person who like has approved a paper that ends up on retraction watch, and so I maybe am a little bit more nitpicky and fine tooth comb with some of this stuff, but it's just because it's important to me that like something that is blatantly false doesn't get missed by me before I say, yes, please publish this.
Yeah. And I would just reinforce something that you said, Addie, and that is sleep on it. I always, for any paper that's any bit complicated, I will sleep on it and I will try and say, what the heck is going on here? And you know what? Usually after a day or two, something will hit me that's what I was trying to figure out. That's what I was trying to say about my review in this paper, or that's what they were trying to do. So sleeping on it is definitely a good idea. And the other thing I would do, and this is my own little short circuit to life, is most papers that I review, I will do a quick Google search and see if anything comes up. And, about half the time I get something that they didn't find. And about half of those, it's something really important. So and that takes only a few minutes. I mean, it's really a no-brainer. But I agree with, going through the reference, mostly reading the titles. Sometimes I'll read through them and then they say they all look fine, and I'm going to let it go because I don't, there's a limit on how much time I have, and I'm going to have to assume that the authors did legitimately read those papers and are reporting on them accurately. But sometimes I'll start looking at the papers they reviewed. I just finished a review where they had about 40 papers in their bibliography, and I think a good 15 of them were not really discussed in any detail in the text, and should have been. And so, I mean, I didn't read the whole papers, but I read the abstracts and maybe a little bit of methods here or there. So yeah, sometimes, reference can be important, but other times, most of the time, you look at just titles and you're fine.
We'll start with Dr. Pierce on this one. So kind of following along the pitfalls that we think for reviewers, what are some of the red flags that you look for when you're performing your review?
So I think like the biggest things are going to be methodology. If the methods just don't address their question, if their research question is really not what they're investigating, if their like stats are looking really like suspicious, not that we have to know, have to know stats. That's what would be too good to be true kind of stuff. It's like, if things don't like, if just big concepts and their people aren't matching up, like the abstract doesn't match the methods, doesn't match the conclusion, those are kind of the biggest things that I'm like, okay, this is going to be either a paper that needs a ton of help and a ton of work, and then this is going to be a big long review, or it's going to be something that's going to go very quickly. So I'm just going to say, like this is probably not worth it. So I think probably just jumping to the methods is just kind of like, do I understand this, and is this going to make sense throughout the whole paper? And if it does, we're on a great track.
That's a
Yeah, usually when I do my first deep dive on a paper, I look at what their outcome measurements were that they said that they were going to be looking for, and I got down to the conclusion. And like right out the gate, if those two things don't line up, like you'd be shocked how many times you get a paper where they say, this is what we're going to be looking for. And then their conclusion is something completely different. It had nothing to do with the outcomes they were talking about. And like right there, I know that that's not going to pass. And then the other thing that I will quickly look at, especially in studies that are a little bit more complex, I jump right to their descriptive tables to make sure that everything adds up. Sometimes, like a surprisingly frequent occurrence is that people have these descriptive statistics tables and the numbers don't add up. So to the numbers that they say that they enrolled, to the numbers in their, analysis group. And so, like, again, same thing right there, like you can't publish something if your numbers don't make any sense based on what you say that you enrolled. So those are kind of the quick things that I look for as a red flag. And then any reported numbers that are just like way too even and way too good to be true, they start to look a little suspicious for things that are maybe not reality. So if I see something like that, you don't ever want to accuse anybody of fabricating something, but I will usually ask the editors to take a closer look at that if I see something like that in a paper.
Dr. Mayer, you think?
You guys said it wonderfully. I concur. No.
I think it's
And that was like a 3-word sentence.
shortest review ever.
That's the thing I love to talk about. So that's the next one.
That is the next.
I don't want to short this topic first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that has put me off initially from being a reviewer was my uncomfortableness with stats. So I am very much interested in your guys' opinions on how do you do a statistical analysis of a review when you're not good at it, which is, I think, a lot of us who are not stat experts. Stats, go for it.
So there's so many things in my brain about this, and I'm trying to see how can I simplify this as much as possible. I already said about EBM, so that's already done. The stats part is where most people feel the imposter syndrome really kick in, because if you're like me, you're sort of marginal on a lot of the math thing, and especially statistics, which I could never get until I read a book called How to Lie with Statistics. And if you're going to read any book about statistics, aside from my book, of course, but I would say read that one. It came back to me last year when my granddaughter was taking AP statistics in high school. The first book that they had to read for the course was How to Lie with Statistics. I immediately knew that she was taking the right kind of statistics course. In most statistics courses, you're taught how to do the tests and all the manipulating of the numbers, which is great for statisticians. And that's where you ask the journal, you say, look, I'm not sure about these stats. I think that you should have a methodology statistics reviewer look them over. And some reviewers do feel more comfortable reviewing stats. I feel like most of the time, maybe 80 to 90% of the time, I can understand the stats enough to say whether they're appropriate or not. And there are certain things that I always go back to as my pet peeves about incorrect use of statistics. And can I put in a plug for our other RLS podcast that Lynn Rapolo and I did a year ago on pet peeves and statistics? So, I go through them all in nauseating detail. But anyway, so that's sort of the main thing. I'll let Addie and that stuff chime in here.
Yeah, so the majority of my imposter syndrome with peer reviewing, especially starting out, came from not being super familiar with the statistics. And over time, through doing this, I've actually learned a lot about statistics, so where I can now review things and I can catch problems with the statistics and I understand them. Just the process of reviewing has taught me a lot about statistics, which is fascinating because I used to hate math with like the passion that really being tested up at 1,000 subs. And now here I am and I do it on purpose. But when you have something that is really complex shouldn't matter because papers are written with words. The concepts should be communicated clearly, in a way that you don't even necessarily need to understand the statistics to have a good idea of whether or not the concept that they are communicating to you is valid. You can, like Dad said, always have a methodologist go back and review the statistics, but there are some papers with these complex statistics. I had no idea what was going on, but I still knew that paper could not be published based on everything else that was already present in the paper. And it came down to simply what they said they were looking for in their outcomes did not line up with their conclusions, and the methodology did not make sense for how they got all this complex data that they did a Cirque du Soleil show worth of statistics to try and prove why something was valid. So it's all about papers are about communication. So if you have written something with words clearly in a way that your purpose and your conclusion can be understood by your reviewer, it shouldn't matter if they, know what some of these complex statistical analyses are. Your paper should make sense to them, and we can always have somebody double check that. So please, for anybody who is considering peer reviewing, don't let a lack of a master's degree in statistics prevent you from doing that. You can always ask for help. You, as somebody who speaks the language of emergency medicine, should be able to, based on the concepts, understand whether or not a paper is a concept that should be published.
I echo everything. Don't get freaked out by the statistics of paper, but I will say, within medical education, it's a lot of the things that I'm reviewing are going to be surveys. So the data kind of is all presented in a fairly similar way, but then there's this subset of qualitatives, papers and methodologies, and those they're distant enough that you should have some familiarity with that before you really dive into reviewing those papers. I know that editors are they're wanting people with qualitative backgrounds because they don't want reviewers to come back and be like, I've never seen a study that looks like this. That was really novel to me. That's not the review that they want. They want somebody who has some familiarity with it and can digest that information and provide a good review. With that being said, I don't do qualitative stuff, but I have reviewed a couple qualitative papers, but I know it's usually because an editor is looking for another reviewer. And they're like, I've got somebody who does qualitative. I just need somebody who's a content person for the education stuff. And I'm like, great, I'll do it. So kind of you're working with the editors on those things. If you want to get into something that you're unfamiliar with, just make sure they're aware and they've got another reviewer who can hit the stats and the methodology part hard. And you can start to get your feet wet in a new area.
Yeah, and something I forgot to mention that can be helpful as a reviewer, especially if you've been given a review type that is a research method that you are less familiar with. The Equator Network has guides for every single type of study that you could possibly ever imagine. That you can literally go to their site and you can click on the link for this is the consensus on how you should be reporting your retrospective studies. These are the cost guidelines of how you do your survey studies, right? Things like that. And you can literally get a little form that's got 10 to 20 points on it that are relevant for each study type that you will likely review, including case reports. So you can just sort of, as you're starting out, use this as sort of a loose skeleton guideline for how the paper that you are reviewing should be presented and what things should be in there. And it is shocking to me how many people who write papers don't use these. As a reviewer, it's a really easy way to get started, and also to kind of have an idea of what you should be putting in your review, what points you should be touching on. But so to Dr. Biersch's point, for some of the qualitative studies, they have guidelines for those too. So I know not everybody knows how to evaluate a scoping review, but there is a guideline for that as well. That is all, expert consensus based on what should be in there. Equator Network.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Addie, because there are a lot of other sites where you can get critical appraisal worksheets that can help you do that.
Yeah, I think I've seen a trend more just in what we're submitting of asking for those kind of did you follow the stroke guidelines? Did you follow these guidelines? So I think those are good for not only for reviewers, but they're also good for authors just to keep in mind of these are how we expect things to be organized as reviewers, as scientists. Take a look at them. This should be an easy thing to just follow. It's a checkbox. This is what you need.
Yep. Peer reviewing and writing are a big Venn diagram. Everything kind of crosses over, so doing one will make you better at the other.
Yeah. So kind of circling back to how you actually so you've got all the pieces, you've looked at it, you've read it, you've made your comments. How do you actually start to write this up to present back to the authors and the editor? We can start with Dr. Malik. Kind of what it's
I usually start my little blurb, and again, it depends on the paper. And there are some papers that just like they don't want you to do sort of like a narrative review. They give you discrete click boxes with topics that they want you to comment on. But I'd say the majority that I review for are still sort of like a narrative review. Is they have a little box that's a narrative that you're providing to the authors, one that is a box where you're providing some comments to the editor, and then the secret box where you provide comments that the authors don't get to see. But so in terms of what I respond to the authors, I usually just start out with thank you for allowing me to review your paper. And then I sort of will provide like an overview. I thought you did a great job of tackling this concept. I think this is meaningful to our specialty, or maybe not the most meaningful, but it's tackled in a way that I think is interesting. And then I go sort of by section. And if they have line numbers for the sections that are given to you in the manuscript, I try to reference the exact lines that I'm talking about. Because as an author, there's nothing more painful than somebody giving you a review point, and then you have to like spend 20 minutes digging through your paper, trying to find what it is that the reviewers were commenting on as you're like sleep deprived and, trying to tackle this thing before your next shift. So yeah, I usually go section by section. And again, the same thing, I try to only include like, this was really good, what you did here, or I noticed that you included this concept, but you didn't include this reference. That's like a major reference from this subject matter. Here's the citation that you should include. The way that you have this written is a little bit confusing, or, can you really say this based on what you said in the other section? So section by section with line references. If you feel like they're missing a big citation on the subject, because typically you're going to be a subject matter expert if you've been invited to review this paper, help them out and provide the citation so that they can include it and improve their paper.
If in cases where they don't have a line by line, where the text isn't lined up that way, I'll number the paragraphs, so it at least helps a little bit to narrow down where my comments are coming from. And I don't feel bad about saying, the last sentence sounds a little awkward. This is the way I would write it, and just put down how I think it would sound better and would make more sense.
Dr. Pierce, how about you? How do you organize your actual writing?
One great thing about Westrum is they've got like, I want this paragraph here, this paragraph here. It's like, I want you to talk about this in this box and this in this box. So that's really nice in putting together a narrative review. But I kind of like my framework for how I'm writing it up. It usually kind of falls under like the big, medium, and small edits. So if there's a paper that like needs a lot of help, this is going to be a revise and resubmit kind of thing. Like, I need you to make this into a different format. Like, let's say they tried to get really researchy on something that was just an innovation, and it's a great innovation. So I want them in a brief innovation report and not in the research stuff. Like, you're going to rewrite this whole paper. So, that's kind of big edits. And I'm telling them like big concepts, like, I need you to you're going to reformat your whole paper, and it's going to look like this. And then it's going to be amazing. Medium edits. I might give a line of, like this paragraph didn't make a whole lot of sense, or, but I'm not usually like, if I'm doing small edits, like the paper is fantastic, except it's got a couple of spots that I couldn't quite get what you were saying. You could probably phrase it better. Then I'm doing like line 5, you need to do this. If I'm doing those kind of like nitpicky small edits, it's like like, please accept this paper, like right when they fix the grammar. And so, that is kind of how I frame how I'm writing the narratives, like sections. I don't want to give them nitpicky, this line doesn't make a whole lot of sense, if they're going to rewrite the whole paper to resubmit it.
Lastly,
and I think that's good point. Contextually, like if you know a paper is just like, this ain't it, and it's going to require a lot of work to rewrite. It's sort of the concept of like kicking somebody when they're down. Don't pick on every single tiny little thing. Just kind of help them with the big concepts that they're going to need to tackle to resubmit this thing.
I think those are really good points. We have 5 minutes left, so anybody in the audience, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. I wanted to kind of circle back to a couple comments that had come up in the chat, is kind of questioning like how, when you don't have protected time for free labor, how do you manage to have time to actually do these detailed reviews? And is there a way to make it less time consuming? Those kind of tips for people who have limited time.
I'd like to answer that one because we all have limited time, even me who's retired. You know, if you do one review a month, that's 12 reviews a year. If every emergency physician did that, I don't think that's a lot of time to ask. And let's say you split it at 50% protected time and 50% your own time because you want to make a donation to the medical literature. The journal editors would be thrilled. So don't think that you have to do like 3 or 4 a month. Just if you started by just doing one a month and got into it and got used to it, and who knows, you might actually like doing it.
I read a fair number of journals, you know, that the stack of paper that comes in my mail, like I feel guilty if I don't touch it. So what I would usually do is I would either right before a string and shift or right after a string and shift, I would take one of my medical journals and sit out on my side porch if it's nice outside, or sit in my living room by my fireplace in the winter. And it was like my downtime. I drink coffee or I drink tea and I read that thing, and it's like relaxing. So I just sort of replaced one of those sessions with the peer reviews that I do. So it's the same process I was doing before, except now the thing that I read hasn't been published yet. Same amount of time.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily like I block time. I don't necessarily like I'm always busy doing a million things. And so I think deadlines, there's a nice hard deadline when you have to return your review. And so having that like kind of forces me to block off some time and get it done. But then also like because of that, I can tell you in this 2 weeks, I am not going to have the time to actually review this and give you a quality review. So I'm going to have to say no. And that kind of helps with the guilt of saying no sometimes. But yeah, I don't try to overuse my no vote, but like if I've, even if I get like the most interesting sounding paper that I would absolutely love to read. If I've already accepted a couple and I know that I'm going to be busy, like circle back to me. If you can't get any other reviewers in 2 weeks, if nobody else responds, I might be more free then, but right now it's just gonna have to be a no.
Yeah, and I think too, this specialty is hard, and sometimes some of what we can do can be a little bit thankless. At least for me personally, the reason I do this and continues to do the amount of it that I do while being admittedly a very academically involved and busy person, I get a lot of satisfaction out of doing this. It is a thing that I can do and that I can feel some ownership over, having positively impacted my specialty, when sometimes some of the things that go on with what we do, you have little control over and sometimes don't feel so good. So this is sort of a career prolonging positive thing that you can do that sort of fights burnout a little bit. As much as it requires more time, I do not find that this process makes me feel burnt out. It actually makes me feel the opposite, which is why I do it as much as I do.
Yeah, I agree. I also feel energized every time I do a review.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
to answer Mark's question, which just popped up on my chat, the enemy of good is perfect. Yes, we don't necessarily insist that our papers be perfect. We want them to be good. We do not want them to be bad. And I'm using those words very broadly. But yes, every little period and comma pronoun is got to be exactly right. We're going to have very few papers. Yes, you want it to be good. You want it to be readable. You want it to be understandable, and you want it to make sense to our colleagues who are going to be reading these papers.
Well, I want to thank each of you guys for coming on. This has been a really great discussion, and I think it'll be useful for many of our audience. So thank you all, and feel free to reach out if anybody in the future is listening to this and has additional ideas for seminars or webinars or things you want to hear more about from these panelists. We will circle back. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Lane, for doing a great moderating job.
Thank you so much.
And Maddie and Elspeth, pleasure working with you again. Take care.